Hello and welcome to part 3 of the tutorials for RapidRig version 2.0. In this tutorial I will be covering the second tab, Generate Rig. So at this point, if you followed along, we've created our proxies and positioned them appropriately to match our character where all the joints would be. And now we're going to generate the rig. So the first thing you need to do is give your character a name. So I'm going to be not very creative, but I'm just going to call this Cowboy. And in the next step, I can choose if I want to create rapid mesh. So if you can see what the annotation says, generates a low resolution mesh that is bound to your rapid rig. This is useful as a placeholder for high-res geometry or as a model on its own. So if you don't have a model and you just want to start using rapid rig for animating some interesting character animations, or if you have a character or you don't have a character that's completed yet and you just want to have a placeholder, you can use the rapid mesh for all those things. Or if it's like a really high resolution character, this is a good substitute for while you're animating. And then you can turn this off and then turn on your final rig, your actual rigged character, skin and everything once you're ready to render it. So I'm going to enable this just so you can see what this option is. And then the next option is tune arms and tune legs. So what these allow you to do is sort of like spaghetti, stretchy, gooey sort of looking arms and legs. You can choose if you just want arms or just legs, or both, or neither. And I'm going to enable both of these. So this is one of the really powerful things with Rapid Rig, is this setup is fairly complex. So being able to have this sort of flexibility in your rig is pretty nice to have, especially in something cartoony like this character, or any sort of stylized character. It can come in handy. And then so once I've set all these settings, again with the name you got to be careful. You can't use like special characters and any of this sort of stuff. Maya does not like that stuff, so it won't allow you to. But once everything else is set, I can go ahead and generate my rig. Now as soon as you click it, you get this warning just asking if you saved your file. So it's a good idea to save your file before you reach this point, just in case. You never know what might go wrong, or you may want to delete the rig, or it's just a good idea to have a backup file. So you can choose to go back and save it, or you can just say, just proceed, generate the rig only, or you can choose to save the proxies and generate the rig at the same time. So if I use save proxies and generate rig, it'll bring up the menu option to give a name, and it'll save out the proxy transforms of the rig. Not really that important anymore, because now with Rapid Rig version 2, the proxies are not automatically deleted once you generate a rig, so you can keep those around for later. So for now I'm just going to choose generate rig only. Now this will take a few moments to generate everything, and once it's ready, you get one last option. Do you want to generate a single hierarchy joint set? And this is mainly intended for use in video games, so you can export a rig with a single chain hierarchy, and the regular rig does not have that. It's broken up for scaling issues and things like that, so every joint is sort of not necessarily parented to it, what would be its parent joint. So I'm going to just choose yes, just so I can show you what this does as well. And there we go. So now you can see that there's this extra geometry. There's a series of controllers, lines everywhere. It's a lot to take in, and you'll also see that there's a whole bunch of new layers created based on the name of your cowboy. So I'm just going to start with the joints here. So once you've created your rig, if I go into wireframe mode, or I can turn on shading X-ray joints, these are the joints for your character. Now because he's so large, I'm just going to go into my display, animation, joint size, and I'm just going to increase this to like 2. There we go, 1.5. Alright, so now they're easier to see, and these are based on the positions of your proxies. Okay, so if I turn on my proxy layer, you can see that, I'll just turn off the body here. You can see that a lot of these things line up with where your proxies were. So that is what the proxies were intended for, just for the position of the joints. So turn off the proxies here, turn back on the body. So these are the joints that you're going to be skinning your character to. Now, you actually don't typically go in and affect the joints themselves. Right? We have the controls for that, so that's the next layer here. So here are the controls. So these are designed to manipulate the character. Now in the next video I'll be going over these in greater detail, but for now I'm just giving you a quick understanding of how the generate reg tab works. So we have all these controls that we can use to manipulate the character. And then after that we have the geometry layer. Okay, this is only created if you turn on the rapid mesh when you generate your character. Now this stuff you can go in and adjust. So I'm just going to turn mesh back on, reference my character layer. So these you can adjust. So let's say, for example, I had a really high resolution character and I didn't want to be animating it because it was getting lousy frame rates and it was hard to play back my animation. So I can go into a lot of these controls and customize them. So I can change like the width and the height, depth, things like that of the different ones. Leg, that one looks pretty close. Upper leg, make it a bit bigger. I'll do both at the same time here, just save some time. And let's see what else. So the upper arms maybe a little bit bigger. Again, it's just an approximation. And let's see. Maybe make these a little thinner. There we go. The thumb's a little bit different because you can scale it in any direction you want. Let's go ahead and make those thinner. So again, it's just sort of an approximation to fit. And I could do the same for the neck. Okay, so that's fairly close. So now if I want, I can turn off my character and work with those. And if I want, I can scale up the head a bit too. I'm just going into the vertices of this and scaling it to match. Again, it's just a guide, but however you want to do it, it's fine by me. And you can even go so far as to go in and manipulate the individual vertices, but for the demo purpose, we'll just say that that's good enough. Alright, so now that sort of fits our character, we can go in and save that and have that ready to go. And then the last option in here is to actually skin your character. So we want to attach our actual character. So you'll notice that this doesn't happen automatically. So I turn on my controls. You see that when I rotate them, it's not affecting the character. So I want to attach this character to the rig. So what I can do is load up the rig that I'm using. Now it automatically loads in a new one if it's generated, but if this is empty, like let's say you've restarted Maya and you want a skin, you can grab this guy and just load the rig in. So select any control and hit load rig, and it'll load in that rig. This is something new, so it's a little bit better. And once I have that, I now know the name of the rig, so I can select the skinning joints of the rig. Now, if you've created your rig to have the single hierarchy chain as well, you now have the option, which joints do you wish to select? So which joints do you want to skin to? So I can either choose standard or single hierarchy. I'm going to just go with standard. And once I have that, I can simply shift select my character and I can choose the skinning method that I want. So I'm going to go bind skin, smooth bind, and I'm going to bind to selected joints, closest in hierarchy, and leave the rest this way. Now you want to be careful, dual quaternion causes issues with joint scaling, so that can be a bit of an issue. And heat map also doesn't work great with a hierarchy that's not all connected. So you could use the single hierarchy and skin with a heat weight map that way. But I'm just going to go with these settings here. You can adjust these as well. I usually go with maximum 3 influences. It's rare that I ever have joints with more, except for maybe in the face or something, but we don't have a face right here. So I'm going to choose bind skin. Now that I have that, I can go in and you'll see when I rotate, my character now moves with these controls. It's a bit slow, so I'm just going to go put this back to preview mesh. There we go, a little bit faster. But if you do find that it's slow, this is when you can now use, you can turn off your character and turn on this geometry, which is going to be a little bit faster to work with. And then from there you need to go in and paint your weights, so going in and fixing how, the elbow bends, and things like that. So I'm just going to spend a couple minutes just going over skinning. Hopefully at this point you're somewhat familiar with it. Typically what I do is I'll start with the extremes and then work my way towards the center. So if I wanted to work with the wrist, let's say I've done my fingers, I'm going to do the wrist. I'm just going to set a couple keys here. Just so I can get a good range of motion. And you always want to push things past what they normally would be. You don't want to just fix the weights so it's like, yeah, that should work for most stuff. You want to kind of put it in its extremes and see how it holds up, because if it holds up in that, then it should be okay for most other things. So I'm just setting keys on 10 frame increments. Okay, so now that I have this sort of test animation going on, I can go in and now start fixing the weights on the wrist. And there's a couple different ways you can paint weights. I'm just going to close this window now just so I don't have clutter. You can either use the Skin, Edit, Smooth Skin, Paint Skin Weights tool. Right here. And then you can go in and paint weights for each bone. The other way to do it is in the general editors, component editor, and then in here you'll have smooth skins. So nothing is showing up here, so to use this you need to select vertices on your character, and then it will give you basically like a spreadsheet of the different values. So on this first vertex here, I'll just select one vertex just so we can see. It has a total of 1 for its entire influence, which is what you typically want. Anything beyond or below that causes weird deformation. But it has a slight value from the elbow curve joint, the upper arm curve joint, but most of it is from upper arm curve joint 3. Okay, so those are the two ways. I'm just going to quickly go over using the paint weights tool, and then maybe we'll just do like some fine tweaking with the smooth skins. in the general or in the component editor. All right, so I'm just going to start looking at this. Okay, so that's clearly an issue. We don't want the geometry to do that when the wrist bends. So I'm going to go into my paint weights tool, and this will be, you can either organize by alphabetical or hierarchy. So if I switch to alphabetical, I'll just go in and find cowboy left wrist. Long list, we got a lot of joints here. Alright, so I can sort of see the influence. So what's happening is the wrist joint is affecting all of this area and nothing here. So all these points are moving with. So I can start to look at changing that influence. So I can start adding influence with the, let's see, let's go back to alphabetical. Start having the curve joints. Let's just turn on our joints layer. So having this joint affect that area more, and so on and so forth. So if I select this joint, that is lower arm curve joint 3. So I'm just going to go in here, find that joint. There we go. And I can start adding influence to that area. So what I can do is set this to replace or use add. Set the value that I want to achieve, and then, set the value I want to achieve here, and then the opacity. So this is how much of this value I'm painting. So if I start with a low value, like a low opacity, I can start painting in some influence here. Now painting weights is sort of a fairly tedious, time-consuming process, but it's kind of fun if you don't mind that sort of thing. It takes a little getting used to. Once you get the hang of it, it's not too bad. So that's already starting to look better. Again, it's just sort of a visual thing, so whatever you think is best for your character. Now you can see things are getting a little bit wonky. You know, some of the points are getting more influence than others, so I can always go in and smooth it out using the brush, or I can just use a flood to sort of smooth things out a bit as well if I want to just do every area that this influences. And you want to make sure that you test this in like all areas. So how does that look? Just going to redo this key here. This one as well, just so I have the. So you can see joints will start to flip if you go a little too extreme. So you just want to be careful of that. Okay, so you can see it's already starting to look like a little bit better there. Sorry, I'm just redoing these keys so they're a little better. There we go. And okay. There we go. So I'm going to go back in here and just kind of keep working on this area a little bit. The nice thing is, like, as you test this, you can see on the fly what your changes are doing. So I'm going to continue to smooth, just sort of smooth in this area a little bit. Just give that a little more influence from that first joint. And then here, I'd like it to have a little more influence from our current joint, which is our curve joint 3. So I'm just going to go back to replace, and I'll put the opacity up a little bit, and I'm just going to paint this value to be a lot more influenced by that joint, so that way it doesn't kind of cave in on us a little bit like it was. And then I can see it's sort of doing this sort of little wobbly thing, so I'm going to have to add in a little bit more influence around these points. And this is where you can, if you're kind of at a good place, you can say, for example, go into edge mode, go to your edge loop, convert your selection to vertices, and now you can use like your component editor. So this is a good example of working with your edge loops just in here. So you can see there's some influence coming from the thumb, and I actually don't want any influence of that. So I can highlight that whole column and get rid of that. And then I could go in here and just use the slider to affect the influence of the next joint. And this one as well has some, so you can kind of prune out some of these other weights as well. And I can also do, things like pick walking as well, which is handy to kind of get. So I can go onto this row here. The thumb might affect a little bit of this area, so I'll leave that for now. And I'm just going to give the lower arm curve joint a little bit more influence here. Maybe something like that. Go back, pick walk across one more time, and then give this maybe something like that. Now if I want, I can go back and maybe give this just a tiny bit more on the wrist, just so it looks a little smoother. Let's go like 0.1 all the way across. That's quite a bit. There we go, something like that. Okay, so now I can see how that's looking for the rest of the deformation, so that looks not bad. Yeah, we're losing quite a bit of volume there, so we could go in and tweak it some more. You can also add things like influence objects and whatever else you want to your characters to make them work the way you want. Now I can see how it's rolling. There we go. That's not bad. And yeah, you can kind of keep going back and forth between those tools. So this is basically how you paint weights. Just keep going. You can use locks and things like that as well when you're painting. So if I was really happy with, the elbow joint or whatever, I can click that and choose to lock it. Well, in this case, I just locked the neck, but in any case, you can lock them, and now whatever weight values are associated with that, they stay there. You want to be very careful with that because it's not always clear when you're changing weights that something is locked. So I'll just do one more, just do the elbow here really quick. So I'll wait till that animation ends. Just put that back to 0. Set a key here. I'm going to go to 100. There we go. So now I have this bit of animation for the elbow. And I can push it even further if I want. So maybe that's, the full range. So I want to be mostly working with the elbow curve joint as well as the lower arm curve joint and the upper arm curve joint. So I'll start with the elbow. So I'm going to go in here and find the left elbow joint. There it is, okay. And now I can start to see, okay, so what's happening here when it gets to about there. So this section here probably needs more influence from the curve joint on the lower part of the arm. And then again, I can use some of the smoothing. Now because this is using like the tune joints, you're going to get like a softer elbow just because of the angles of the joints for making it kind of cartoony, which I'll be going over that sort of thing. But so you can kind of just keep working your way through this way, adjusting your opacities as you go. Change your brush size. And then just do one last little bit here just to kind of conclude this. There you go. So that's a bit better. But anyways, you can spend a lot of time just tweaking weights. So that's kind of as far as I'm going to take on this lesson. And then once you're done, of course, you want to make sure that you delete all this animation that you've now put on there, because you know, if you're doing character referencing and things like that, you just want to be careful. And then I should also mention how to attach the eyes and hats, or hat in this case. The eyes, you don't have to skin to anything, and in fact, you'll notice that the eyes, those eye joints shouldn't be affecting anything right now, okay? Because they're not part of the skinning joints, because otherwise your whole eye cavity would rotate as the eyes rotate. So what we want to do, though, is we want to make sure that the eyes are attached to the joints. So you could do that with either skinning or with a constraint, whatever you like. I typically use constraints. They calculate a little bit faster. So I'll select my joint, select my eyeball, and I'll go constrain, parent. Just going to reset the settings. Make sure maintain offset is on. Hit apply. Do the same thing for the other eye. Select the joint, select the eye, apply. And then for the hat, because the hat doesn't deform with anything, it just stays attached to the head, I'm just going to constrain it to the head tip joint. And there we go. So now if I turn on the body and I go ahead and rotate the eyes, you can see the eyes follow the control now, and then the hat will also follow the head now as well. Alright, so there we go. So in a few minutes you have a character skinned to a rig. The next lesson I'm going to go over using the rig, the controls, and some of the different features that it has that you may not be familiar with other rigs. Thanks for watching.